Send it to Mom.
Yeah, we're right now on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis in the Bavli, Maseches Gittin by the Mishna. Omer 10 get the Leishti B'Shtar Shikar Zeliavi. Somebody who says, please give this get to my wife and this shtar for my evet. In other words, he's telling a shliach, he's making a shliach leheloch, he's making a messenger to bring it over to his wife or to his servant. If he wants to change his mind before the get or the shtar shikar reaches the hand of his wife or his evet, he's able to, because it's a chayiv for them, Div Rabbi Meir. That's the words of Rabbi Meir. We'll see soon the explanation. Chum say only by Gittin Noshim, but not when it comes to freeing your slave. Because you give a schus for a person shalei b'fanav, and you only give a chayiv to a person in front of him. So because when it comes to Gittin Noshim, it's a chayiv for her. It's a debt for her. It's like an obligation. You're able to cancel. You're able to cancel. There's no shliach. The shliach can't be zeicha for her if it's not in front of her. But when it comes to zachin la'adam, when it comes to the eved, it's a schus for him to be free. So then the moment it goes to the shliach's hands, he's already halfway zeicha. He's not 100% zeicha because if you die before it reaches his hand, and then it's canceled. But I'll call upon him, you're not able to take it back. If you want not to feed your servant, you're allowed. Theoretically, you could tell him work for your own bread. So therefore, it's no matter what, it's a schus for him. He's not going to tie no, oh, my master's going to take care of me. Master doesn't have to take care of him. However, when it comes to not being Zan, his wife, he's not allowed. So therefore, for his wife, for sure, it's a chayv for her to be divorced because she's being fed while she's married to you. Omer lehem. What if he's a kohen and his eved has the schus to eat truma? So it is a chayiv for your eved if the master is a kohen of kopanim, that his servant is allowed to eat truma when he's his servant, but if you're going to free him, then he's not going to be allowed to eat truma anymore. They told him because he's his kinyan, because he's his acquisition, that's why he can eat truma. And the Gemara will explain, he could always sell him against his will to someone else, to Yisrael. So it's not like a schus for him. You can't say it's a schus for him. The fact that he's able to eat truma, that's not a schus. Interesting. The Gemara now says, here there's a machlokes actually between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, like we'll see soon. Yosef, Rav Huna, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Kamei de Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Huna and Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef were sitting in front of Rav Yirmiyah. The Yosef, Rav Yirmiyah become benamnin. Rav Yirmiyah was sitting and he was sleeping. The Yosef Rav Huna become Rav Huna was sitting and he was saying, Shmami no midrabanan. We can learn from here, midrabanan hatofis the Baal Chayv, someone who grabs for a Baal Chayv. In other words, let's say Reuben is owed money from Shimon, and then someone grabs the money from Shimon. You're allowed to. Just like we see in our Mishnah, that if you gave the shtar shikar for your eved, the chachamim say that you're not allowed to be chayzer because the shliach is, so to speak, typhus for the eved. He's like grabbing the shtar for the eved, so you can't take it back. So too in any case, anybody's typhus about the Baal Chayv, the Bakum Shacham, who's typhus about Chayv, you're allowed to. You're kind of, even if it's not you're not owed the money, you're typhus for someone else, you're allowed. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, right? What's the difference on a basic level?
You're doing it against his will. You typhus it.
On a basic level, the Odin gave it to the shliach. He gave it. Here, you grab it. So we'll see soon. The Gemara will get into that. Amarloi. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef told Rav Huna, even if there's other people who are owed the money as well. In other words, let's say he's a Baal Chayv for Reuven and also for Levi. So you're grabbing for Reuven, you're making Levi lose out. So the question is, we could say the same thing in our Mishnah. What's happening? you're being typhus for the Eved. Shlich is being typhus for the Eved, but he's taking away from the other. So maybe you should say, even if you're chav lachedim. Omer le'in, he said, yeah. Rav Huna said, yeah. From Mishna Mashmal says, even if you're chav lachedim, because we see the shliach is being typhus for the Eved over the Baal, over the master. Adhachi isar bohu Rav Yirmiyah. In the meantime, Rav Yirmiyah woke up. Omer lahu, he told him Dardiki children. He was, I guess, slightly disrespectful. Maybe, I don't know. Hachi Omer Rav Yechanan. This is what Rav Yechanan said. A typhus about chayv makom shechav lacherim loikana. You're not typhus. You're not clean if it's makom shechav lacherim. So if it's just for for you're grabbing from Shimon for Ruvain, so you're not being chad for anybody. Shimon owed the money to Ruvain. So then ena chanami. But not if it's b'makom shechav lacherim. So what's the difference between our Mishnah? In time Mishnah saying in our Mishnah, you're making the owner lose his slave. Because he said the word tenu, it's as if he's saying zchut. So you can't compare it to any other case. He himself gave it over to the shlich, and he said the word tenu. It's not just that he gave it over. He said tenu. He said give it. So because he said give it, it's a different situation. It's interesting. The Yerushalmi will tie choice that he mamish said zchut. He didn't just say tenu. He said zchut. Okay, so a little difference in Bavli 11b. We're getting more into the sugya. Omer of Chitza, Teifus of Balchev, Makom Shchav Lachedim, Bonam Lachlikas, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanan. If you're Teifus for Balchev in a place where you have Lachedim, remember Rabbi Yochanan Baskin, you're Loikana. According to Rav Chitza, it's a Machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. The Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, Mishaliket is a payah. Let's say you own a field and you have to separate payah, the corner of the field for the poor people. And you gathered the payah. The owner gathered it. He said it's for this specific poor person. Let's say he had a relative or a friend, he wanted to give it. Rabbi Eliezer says he's allowed to. The Chum say you can't do that. You can't hold it for a specific ani. The first ani that comes is the one you have to give it to. It's interesting, when it comes to kohanim, you are allowed to. You have Tovas Hanoah that you're allowed to choose which kohen you want to give the truma to, or the trumas ma'aser. However, when it comes to the poor people, you're not allowed to. We'll see why in a minute. According to the Chum, you're not allowed to. So the maybe this is the machlekes. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you could be teifus the Baal Chayv Makom Shechav Lachedim. This poor person is owed the payah. There's other poor people who are also owed. You're making them lose out. Fact is, you're allowed to, because teifus the Baal Chayv Makom Shechav Lachedim kana. Rabbi Eliezer holds your koine. Hashenk in the Chacham, they say because you can't be teifus the Baal Chayv to a poor person if you're being chav lachedim to other poor people. They're also owed the money. You can't grab it for one over the other, and the first one who comes is the one who gets it. Says the Gemara, no. Omer Abeimar, V'temer Apapa, maybe this is not a good analysis. Adkan, we're on top of Yud Beis Aleph now. Adkan like Omer Rabbi Eliezer, Hasam ele demigoi diboy mafkir lehu lenichsei v'havayoni v'chazile. The reason Rabbi Eliezer says you could be teifus for the Baal Chayv is theoretically you're able to grab it yourself. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's an interesting svara. Because we do have such a thing by Demai also, because theoretically you could become an ani and grab it for yourself, you're able to be zeicha for another one. The migoi helps you to be zeicha for lechavre. But in a regular case, not.
No, but is it because you could become poor yourself, or because he can make his property hefker, and then he could just take it?
Because you could become poor yourself. The Gemara says v'hevioni. Diboy mafkilu l'nichse v'hevioni.
Because he doesn't have any more property, because he made it hefker? Is that the deal?
Make all your property owners. Even though you didn't do that, because you theoretically could do that, it's sufficient to enable you to grab for the poor person.
Could a person make his property hefker for a few seconds, grab it, and then take away the hefker?
No, you don't actually have to make a property hefker, according to that opinion. You just the theoretical capability of making an hefker is enough to enable you to grab for your friend. Now, that's not what the Chacham holds. That's the way we want to explain Rabbi Eliezer. There is a Tosfos that he says, the fact of the matter is, Rav Papa, who's saying this svara, actually holds a Tosfos about Chayv Makom Shechav Lachedim loikana. You're not good. So you don't have to say the Shittas Chachamim. Sorry, 1 second. The Gemara goes on. The reason why the Chachamim say over there that you cannot do that is because there's a special limud in the pasuk of the Siv. It says in the pasuk says, you can't leave the pale. You can't finish the corner of your field. You can't pick the gleanings. You should leave it to the poor person. The way we could read the pasuk is instead of comma you're not allowed to pick it for a specific poor person. But here not. Says Tosfos ultimately, remember, Rav Papa himself actually holds up. The Gemara says, what's he going to do? Use that if you're a poor person, you're not allowed to keep it. You still have to separate payah. There's a certain rabbinic designation of what's considered a poor person. Let's say your field is small enough that you're still considered a poor person. Nevertheless, you still have to set aside payah. Can't keep it for yourself. Okay, interesting sugya. By the 2 dots down, Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. If you want to not feed the Eved, you're able to. So therefore, it's for sure it's supposed for him to go free because he doesn't have any solid benefits even when he's a slave, such as being fed, because you don't have to feed him. Even if he is being fed, at any moment this could change. So therefore, it's a schus for him to go free. Says the Gemara, Shabbat, we know we can learn from here. That the Rav could tell his Eved, he could tell his servant, work for me, I'm not going to feed you. Because we see in our Mishnah, he could tell him he's not going to feed him. So how would that work? How would he make any money? How would he eat? Collect charity, I guess. Sounds a little crazy, right? We'll look in the halacha soon. We're going to look in okay, we'll take a look soon. The Gemara answer is no. You don't have to say it. It's a machlokes, basically. It's you do a dika machlokes and shas. So from our Mishna, we can be medayik that you're able to tell your servant the same mitzvah. Says the Gemara, no, lavdaf. And here, what are we talking about? Not that you have to work for me and not get fed, but that you have to. Right, that's what Rashi says. Chazor to collect charity. Not to say that to collect charity, which is hard to understand. How you could throw your servant on the public purse and benefit from his work all day. That sounds like almost ridiculous. There is such a shita. There's definitely such an opinion. Obviously, it wouldn't be encouraged, but is he legally able to? So no, you don't have to say he's legally able to. Here he's talking about you're allowed to keep your wages to feed yourself. So, Frank the Gemara, if that's the case, the Gavasaga Isha. Similarly, by a woman, why can't you do such a thing for your wife also? You could tell her to work for her food. Says the Gemara, by her, she's guaranteed to be fed, because let's say her work is not good enough. So then you still have to feed her. Frank the Gemara, I have it now. I mean, with the loy suffix. Well, what about if he doesn't work enough? So the Gemara says no. Then you don't have an obligation. A servant that the bread to fill his stomach, he's not worth. What is he doing with it for his master? So you can't force the guy to lose his own money for his effort. The woman, you have an obligation, financial obligation. It's interesting because you bought him. So why is it the Tzibur's problem? He's on his own. You don't have an obligation. Legally, you don't have an obligation when you buy an Evet. If he can't feed himself, he has to figure it out. If he's not worth his keep, if he's not worth his food, so you could either free him, or if you want to keep him as a slave, keep him as a slave, and then he'll beg for food. I guess you have to give him the time to beg for food. I'll cope on. Interesting. It's interesting. The Gemara doesn't really get into so much in many of these legal questions, like the moral implications of the question, the philosophical. You have a slave and then you're just letting him beg because you don't want to feed him. Interesting. Legally,
we're talking about a Kanani, right?
Evet Kanani. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. What would be the din for an Evet Ivri? I mean, the would be the same din. Evet Ivri. think so. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I mean, you don't have to feed him if he can't feed himself. And evidently, I'm saying if his work is not worth it. But definitely we are talking about Evid Kanani. There's no question about it.
Yes.
There's a clear Rashi that he says, Rashi says, the last Rashi on the page, he says, the Shaykh mitzvah Kisha. He's Chayiv mitzvah like a woman. That's an Evid Kanani. What about an Evid Ivri? How would we apply this din by an Evid Ivri? Maybe it would be the same thing. Toshma, come in here. It says in the, so we're dealing with this question. Can you basically make him work for no food and then let him beg for it? Or do you call upon him have to let him work for his pay, for his keep, for his food? Toshma, come in here. It says, if you have a servant who was exiled to the Ir Miklat, his master doesn't have to feed him. Not only that, his whatever he does, whatever he's going to work, goes to his Rebbe. Shmami, no, we can learn from here. That you're able to tell him, work for me, and I'm not going to feed you, because we see if he's that he killed somebody b'shaking, you don't have to feed him, and he still has to work for you. Says the Gemara.
No, but how does an Evid Kanani, how does an Ir Miklat makalet him, because he's not Jewish?
He is Jewish. He has a bris milah. He was tvila. He goes to the mikvah.
Not Jewish. It's a process. He might end up becoming Jewish, but he's not Jewish.
He is.
He really is.
He is Jewish. He's
after the shikra.
After the shikra, he has the mitzvahs of a man, but before the shikra, he has the mitzvahs of a woman. So the din of an arbiter would still apply to him.
Okay.
Does the din of an Ar Miklat apply to a woman? I guess so. And these are interesting questions. But yeah, he's definitely a Jew, but he's not yet a full-fledged like male, doesn't have obligations of a male. Yeah, we do have a woman. Of course, the Gemara talks about a woman also being exiled to the Ir Miklat. You know, l'chayda, she's potter from all the mitzvahs aseish man grama. This is not a mitzvah aseish man grama. It's not even a question. Okay, so what happens? So we see clearly from here. The Rav can tell the Eved, work for me, and I'm not going to feed you. We see from the Ir Miklat. Says the Gemara, my skin in here. What are we talking about? The Omer late say ma'isi adai from zenisayach. Told him, work for your food. Says the Gemara, Yochi ma'isi adai my little Rabbi. So why does it say in the Brayso that the work of his hands goes to his Rebbe? His work of his hands goes for his food. Says the Gemara, lahadafa, if there's extra. If there's extra, goes to his master. Hadafa pshita, it's obvious if there's extra, why should he keep it? He's an Eved. Well, the tema, you might think that would probably be a very, very difficult to keep tabs on him if he's in a different city. You know, he kills somebody by mistake, he's in the Ir Miklat. To make sure that all everything he's producing is going to you, that probably would be a headache. So the Gemara says, if there's extra, obviously you get it. You might think to say, just like, because if he doesn't have enough, he doesn't have to give to you, according to this way we want to explain, right? And he does have to feed him. I'll call upon him you can't tell him not to work for his food. He has the right to work for his food. So just like, because if he doesn't have extra, he doesn't give. Even if he has extra, maybe you shouldn't take it from him. And Rashi explains, maybe he should save it for a rainy day when there'll be difficult times. Mashmalon, that no, if there's extra, he does have to give it to him. So what's why are we talking about an Ir Miklat? Why, if this seems like a simple din anywhere? Why specifically Ir Miklat? It says about the person going to the Ir Miklat, he should live, which means you should give him more life than usual. And therefore, you might think to say that you're not able to take from him the chalal. Maybe you should let him keep his wages. Kamash Malon, that Kamash Malon, you might think to say, the hadofa should belong to him, the extra wages should belong to him, because, let's say to save for a rainy day. Kamash Malon, that no, if there's extra, you get it. That's a chiddush. It says in the end of that brayso, that a woman who's exiled to near her husband does have to feed her. Must be he didn't tell her to work for your food. The Omer Labaila, my chayiv. If he told her, why is he chayiv? She should work for food. With the Sefer the Leomer, in the end, he didn't tell her to work for food. By the Evid also didn't tell him. Really, he told him, what about the woman? Why can't he tell her to work for food? We're talking about that he's obligated if she doesn't make it. It says in the very end of the brayso, that if he told her to work for your food, Rashai, you're allowed. Must be that he didn't tell her in the beginning, because that's the end of the brayso. He must Maseches. If she makes enough, then he tells her to work for your food, then you're allowed. First part is if she doesn't make enough. Second part is if she makes enough. Maseches my lememro. If she makes enough, what's obvious? Why does the brayso tells this? Mal detema, you might think to say, we shouldn't require her to go and work because she's in a new town, Rashi says, and people don't recognize her, and she's gonna have to schlep around town to try to find jobs. So maybe you shouldn't require her to do that. He's allowed to tell her that she has to work for her. Rashi is very interesting. He says, Kuda bas melech, kol Yisrael b'nei malachim. All Jews are b'nei malachim. All Jews are the sons of kings. That's very good for our self-esteem to read this Rashi. The Gemara goes on. Let's say that this nekuda, if he could tell the servant to work and not feed him, is a machlekes tonight. Because it says, a servant could tell his master, in a year of famine, either give me food or let me free. Let me say it's up to the rabbi. My love, maybe this is a machlekes. According to the Chachamim, Yochel, he's able to tell the Eved to work even without feeding him. According to Shimon Gamliel, any Yochel, he's not able. He can't tell him. So because he can't tell him, he has to feed him. So if he has to feed him and he can't feed him, you have to let him free. Let's analyze this. The wording is to feed me or let me free. It should be either feed me or let me work for my keep. Why specifically we're talking about a year of drought more than any other year? That he could tell him either feed me or let me free. You should say feed me or let me work for my keep. But to Shimon Gamliel, he's not able to say to work without getting fed. So what are we talking about? He told him to work for your keep. But we're talking about a drought because during a drought it's not going to work. Food is sky high. It's too expensive. It's scarce. Either feed me or let me free, because it's impossible for the servant to work for his keep. People will have more mercy on me if I'm a free person, so you have to free me. If I would be a slave, they're not going to give me the same amount of stuff, because it makes sense logically. I mean, you see a servant, you say, let his master take care of him. Why should I bother? Rabbanan Sabri, the Chum hold, man de meracham abnei chari, a person who's going to be merachim on a free person will also be merachim on a servant. Rashi is very interesting. He says the shaykh b'mitzvahs kisha, because he's shaykh and mitzvahs just like a woman. So really, both opinions hold that he has to feed him. You can't just tell him not to feed him. Specifically in Mishnah, but where he can't feed, where the servant can't feed himself. In other words, he has to allow him to work for his food. Both opinions hold he has to allow him to work for his food. Feed him or allow him to work for his food. He can't just have him work with no food. In a year of famine, when his work is not sufficient, either he feeds him, according to Gamliel, or let him free so that the people will give him tzedakah, because he's afraid they won't give him proper tzedakah. Shenk and the Chum will still give him tzedakah even if he's an because he's chayv mitzvahs kisha. Okay, so that's not a raya. We don't have a proof that there's an opinion that holds that you're allowed to make a servant work without feeding him, and with collecting all of his wages, plus he has to go collect tzedakah to feed him. No, we haven't found an opinion that holds that yet. Toshma, come in here. We're on the bottom now. The last, the end of the third to last line in Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Come in here. The Omer Rav said, somebody who sanctifies the hands of his Eved. So now his hands are Kodesh. How does he collect the wage? The moment he works, the amount of a pruta, it goes straight to hektish. So what does he do first he borrows the money, he eats, and then as he works, he's paying back what he had already owed, so that's a way to do it. We can learn from here that you're able to tell your servant, because otherwise, we're obviously talking about you borrow money to eat, and then as you're working, you're paying back every time there's less than a pruta, so to speak. You're setting aside to pay back the hektish. You're setting aside to pay back the person you borrowed from, because otherwise, the moment there's a pruta, goes straight to hektish. Sorry. So l'chayda, we're talking about that he's not feeding him because he said he could be makdish. He could be makdish his hands. How could he be makdish his hands if you have the obligation to allow him a kopanim to work for his food? Shouldn't be allowed to. And the fact that he's allowed to be makdish yodov, it's a raya, it's a proof that he's able to see a seyimid in his own. And the seyimid, the schus, the merit that the Odin has with his servant's hands, the work of his hands, goes straight. He's able to give it over to hektish. Says the Gemara, no, we're talking about where he's feeding him. He's feeding him. So he's able to makdish his hands because the Odin is feeding him. So if so, why is he borrowing? If his master's feeding him, why does he need to borrow money? We're on the next page, base. And for the Gemara answers lahadafa to eat more than what his master has to give him. Let's say he wants to eat more, he's able to be loive v'oichel. So the Gemara says, hektish should tell him until now was enough for you without hadaf. In other words, who's his new master? Who's the new master of Yadav, of his hands? Hektish. So the Gizber of Hektish should be able to be trained to tell him when you were working for your Yadav, you didn't have the schus for Hadafa to get extras. Now also you shouldn't want Hadafa. Says the Gemara, Hektish Gufei Nichale. It's good for Hektish for him to eat extra, to eat more. Why? In order for him to be more healthy, Hektish would be happy if he eats more. How can you work and pay back the loan? Every pruta that you're making is becoming kaddish. The fachas from pruta, he stipulated every less than a pruta is going to go to pay back my loan. And then you're able to do it in like installments. You, so to speak, I think you make a t'nai, you make a condition. Okay, now this makes sense that we're talking about that he was makdish the hands of his servant, but he's also being ma'ila l'mezonis. He's giving him food. The Omer Rav said, a makdish yedei avdoi, somebody who sanctifies the hands of his eved, Rav said that the eved is able to eat, to work and eat. If he doesn't have food, how is he going to serve? Who's he going to serve? He's not going to be an eved. Who's going to work for him? If he's not going to work for his food, who's going to work for him? If you're going to say the earlier case, the case of there's two cases of Rav. So when he says that he's a loiv of a pareh, is talking about b'maila, that he is giving him food. And the Rav is not able to tell his servant to say he has to feed it. So he's makdish yodav and he's feeding him. And Rav, the second din of Rav, where he says, there's no problem. He doesn't have to be loiv. He doesn't have to borrow. Just straight up what's that a raya? That his hands are not kodesh. Otherwise, he would have to be loiv. He'd have to borrow. Why did he say he doesn't have to borrow? Is because he's not feeding him. Shaper makes sense. Talking about he's not feeding him and he's able to. So why do we say this svara? Who? Why do we say the svara? The reason why he doesn't become Kaddish, who's going to do it for him? Whoever wants to. In other words, whoever wants to should be able to do it for him. In other words, he should be collect from tzedakah. So Raya, you're not allowed to. Shema Mina, and that's the difference in the two dinim of Rav. The first din of Rav is where the master is feeding him. The master's not feeding him; he's not doing his obligations. Then the servant he's not Kaddish. His hands are not Kaddish. Now it's interesting. What happens if he starts off by feeding him and then in the middle he stops? Maybe also it's retroactive. The Chaloy Sekdish is only able to happen as long as the servant, the master is keeping his tonight's condition, maybe.
No, but in the second case, is it the hands are not Kaddish, or that the hands are Kaddish, but it's in the interest of the.
Sorry, I think I got cut off.
Hello? Is the second case that the hands are not Kaddish? Or is it that it's in the interest of the Gizbar that he stays healthy, so he eats? So they say, even though your hands are Kaddish, we're going to allow you. The Kaddish is going to allow you to eat. So the beginning of your work is to feed yourself, and we'll take the rest.
It's an interesting pshat. It's a very interesting pshat. I mean, the Rashi says the way I said it. It could be there's other Rishonim who say the way you're saying. You see, there's a Rashi. If you're going to say it makes sense. But the din of Rav, the first din of Rav is the Chal Hektish. Rashi says we're talking about Mailam Mazenis where he's feeding him. Come. The Rav is not able to tell the servant to work for me and I'm not going to feed you. The second case of Rav, this is also in Rashi. The Omer Loi Chayil Hektish. That we say that the hektish is not chal. See, Rashi clearly touches us. The hektish is not chal. That he's not feeding him, is not keeping his obligations, so he doesn't have the ability to be makdish. You're only able to be makdish if you do your obligations. Shaper makes sense. So the way Rashi touches us is chal or not chal, but it could be there's other Rishonim that say like what you're saying because it does make sense. It's logical, I think. Okay, next, we're in the Gemara Toshma. Coming here. The Omer of Yerushalmi said, I can tell Yad Avdi Shel Chaveroi. What happens if you cut off the hand of the Eved of your friend? What do you have to do? What are your obligations? You give Shiftei, the fact that he's not working, he's off his job, and you give him you pay the value of his hand. Rashi says you still, theoretically, if he wouldn't be ill in his bed, he would be able to watch cucumber as something, an easy job. That you have to pay to the rabbi. And you have to give him everything else, his refuah. So too, you have to give him nezek and tsar. And that goes to the rabbi. Obviously, the tsar is part of refuah. And he's nizan minat tzedakah. What happens to the Eved? He's nizan minat tzedakah. The Eved seems to be the Nebuch who loses out the most. The Rav can tell his servant, work when they won't feed you. Araya, the moment he can't work, he doesn't have to feed him. Says the Gemara, no, we'll say that we're talking about b'mayla l'mezenis. Talking about that you're feeding him. So what is he collecting from tzedakah? For the extras. We shouldn't use the word nizay. We should use the word misparis, which would be more referring to the extras. Sha'ar tzrocha, Rashi says that's like parnos. We can learn from here that Rabbi Yochanan argues with Rav that you're allowed to tell your servant, work for me and I will not feed you. Okay.
That case sounds very unjust. You cut off the guy's hand, you pay the owner, and then you tell the guy you cut the hand off, okay, now go collect from charity. It doesn't sound just.
I have to say
the guy who cut off his hand should have to pay him.
Okay, one second. I'm going to bring the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch about this did. And we might stop here. We might go to the Yerushalmi just so we're able to cover some ground. 1 second. I'll be back in a second. I have to get the Simon ratio there. Simon ratio on Hilchos Avodah. Oh, I actually have it. Sorry. I have it right here. Reish Samach Zayin. Hilchos Avodah. So the din is, started over here, sorry. Shulchan Aruch. Yochel Rav Leimer La'avdei Asei Mini Benizach. A Rav is able to tell his servant, work for me and I'm not going to feed you. That's the din. The din is like Rabbi Yochanan. And we also had it in Maseches Ksubas. This is only by an Eved Knani, but not by Eved Ivri, says the Shach. Even though we don't have an Eved Ivri nowadays, let's say, okay. And what should he do? He should go collect stokah. The Yidden are chayav to be machay. There's a kupas hakol, right? We have an obligation to feed the poor. So they also have an obligation to feed him, to feed this servant. The Yerushalmi says, Ramah, this way you're able. Okay. This way you're able to say, I'm not going to feed you. That's only when the years are proper. But in the year of drought, that nobody will have mercy on him if he's a slave. But he could tell him to work for your food, even though it's not enough. Very interesting. So that's like almost like neither shittuk that we said before. You could tell him to work for his food. Somebody cuts off the head of the Eved Knani of your friend. You give 5 things to the Adin.
Why did he cut off his hand?
Why did he do it? I don't know. It's very interesting. In Jewish law, if you cut off someone's hand, like in secular law, what happens if you cut off someone's hand?
Attempted murder, you're going away for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, it depends if you're in a liberal, if you're
going to the big house.
I'm joking. You're going to the big house for a while. According to the Western system. According to Jewish law, you just pay a big fine. If you have the money to pay up, it's not like you also, we believe in God, so God will obviously punish you. But according in the courts, he just has to pay a massive amount of money.
Maybe Trump is Jewish.
What?
Maybe Trump is Jewish.
What do you mean?
He just pays everybody off.
Oh, yeah. Whatever, yeah. Even the Western courts, if you're rich enough, usually you can get out of it. In that way, I think of course, in every way, the Jewish system is much better, but Jewish system is built less that way. Baruch Hashem, it's less corrupt. Whatever. Humans are corrupt by nature. They're corruptible. That's why there's dinim about not taking bribes and so on and so forth. Obviously. Okay, so what happens? You give the chamisha dvarim l'odin, the eved nizin mitztaka mi'atztaka. He should get from tztaka. Even though he's taking the Shabbos, he's taking the value because he's able to tell him, work for me and I'm not going to feed you. But also, what about the money going for his cure? You do use that for his cure. Let's say they thought he would take 5 days. In the end, it only took him 3 days. The master takes the rest. Even if it caused him pain. For sure, if the Odin caused him a Chabala, he's exempt. Okay, yeah, there's a moral question, like you said. How could you do such a thing? What's the logic behind it? But that's the din. The din is you're allowed to do that in most cases of service. We'll stop here with the Bavli, and we're going to deal with tomorrow. We're going to deal with this din about Shevis, Ripoy, Nezek, and so on and so forth. Let's do some Yerushalmi.
I mean, I think the only time in the Torah when they talk about mutilation is, what do you call it? When a woman grabs his private parts, I think in say, so cut off.
Of a cut. Right, that's true. Yeah.
And I think that's the only case.
Right, and it doesn't literally mean to cut off.
So that tells me that it's something very undesirable or something that we should avoid.
Right, we don't punish by mutilation, that's true.
Doing that.
There's a famous story of Shmuel Hanagid, that there was a guy who used to curse him, and a non-Jew who was very jealous. He was the vizier in one of the caliphates in Spain about 1,000 years ago. And one time the caliph was walking with him, and this guy didn't realize. He started cursing Shmuel Hanagid, and the caliph right away said this guy's tongue should be cut off because he just disrespected the vice president, the vizier. So obviously Shmuel Hanagid was a Jew, was distasteful for him. Instead, he realized the guy was a poor person, he was bitter, so he gave him a lot of money. And a few days later, he saw that the caliph saw this guy still had his tongue. So he said, "What's going on?" So he said, "Speak to him and see what he says about me." He started praising Shmuel Hanagid. He said, "You see, I cut off his tongue. I switched the tongue they used to curse me, and now it's a tongue that's blessing me." That's a famous story.
Wow. Spain was Muslim at the time, right? At that time, I guess.
Yeah, right. That's the golden age of Spanish Jewry under the Muslim rule.
Yeah, it seems after the Muslims were taken over by the Christians, then they expelled the Jews almost immediately, right? 1492, something like that. So the Muslim was better. Yeah.
All right, we're in Halacha Hey, Perak Rishon Halacha Hey in the Yerushalmi.
Yeah.
The same thing that we just learned from the Bavli.
Thank you.
Somebody who says to give this get for my wife, if you want to change your mind after you give it to the shliach, you're allowed to. Chum say only when it comes to the get for your wife, not with a star to free your servant. You're zoicha for a person even if it's not in front of him. So you give it to shliach, he's already zoicha for the evet. You cannot be chav, cannot cause something bad for a person unless it's in front of him. So the servant doesn't really have the benefit on you because theoretically you don't have to feed him. But if you don't want to feed your wife, you're not allowed. So for her, it's definitely a benefit while she's married. Your Evid's able to collect from truma from other people, nothing to do with you. He has a schus to collect truma. So if you're the master is a kohen, it's a choy for the Evid. They said because he's his kinyan. Moshe explains he's his kinyan. He's the kinyan of the kohen. It's not called a choy.
Kinyan of what?
What?
What did you say about the kinyan?
He's the acquisition of a kohen. Theoretically, you could argue, at least according to the opinion, that you can tell your servant to work for you, and be'eni zoncha, that while he's your servant, he can collect from the payoff, from the leket, from the shikha, from the stuff that is set aside for poor people. The evet. Interesting. The freedom of the servant is stronger than the small benefit that he's going to get from eating hefker. I think maybe that's what the Maseches says, if I understand it correctly. Somebody who says, give this get to my wife and give this star shikra to my servant, and he dies, you don't give it after he dies. So here's where you see he's not actually, the shlich is not actually zoicha for the evet, but you just can't go back. But if you die and it didn't reach the evet's hands, it's canceled. If you say to give a money, certain amount to a certain person, and he dies, you still give it to him because it's shchiv mirah. We're talking about a person who's shchiv mirah, on his deathbed, you have to honor his word. when it comes to the star only comes into effect when it reaches his hand. So if he dies, it's over. But if you said to give the money, you have to give the money. It's as if you already have a Yerushalmi. It's as if the money left the hands of the Yerushalmi. It's a kind of chazal. Says the Gemara, over 10 gets at least. So now the Gemara deals with what we also dealt with a little bit in the Bavli in the beginning. Kolatar at Omer 10 kohil. In most cases, to say 10 means hoilech, to bring it. V'hocha at Omer 10 kizocha. Here you're saying zocha laden shlei b'ponav. So it's as if he said zocha. Maybe what if he doesn't want to give it to him? Kaini masniso zocha gets elishes chayt shtar shikha zeh lavdi. You have to change the lashon in the Mishna. In the Gemara we touched, what are we talking about? We're talking about. Oh, sorry. What are we talking about? We're talking about in the Bavli we said sorry. That's what we said in the Bavli. That if you're grabbing for somebody, you're allowed to. And the lush, and we said in our Mishnah, when you said tnu, it's as if you're saying schu. Even if you didn't say schu, you said tnu, it's as if you said schu. So Tosfos asks, we see it in other places, that if you say tnu, Rav Yochanan doesn't hold to that. Tosfos says. We see in Gemara Maseches Bavli 11b. Here it's different because it's das mat. Here he's giving it his and he's giving it. The Yerushalmi doesn't say that. Yerushalmi says you actually have to say zchu. If you said tnu, if you didn't use the word zchu, zechei, you use the word tnu, it wouldn't work. Loshen masnisa amerkin. If you're medayik in the Mishna, we see that clearly. We're turning the page in my Gemara and my Yerushalmi to that vav on the base. Lefisha zachin lodem shalei b'fanav vein chaven lodem el b'fanav. The Mishnah says zachin lo'li lodem. So you obviously have to say zchei. Rabbi Meir Reimer Chayvu bein Lezeb and Lezeb. The Machlekes was Rabbi Meir held it was a chayv for both of them, so you're able to go back. Rabbanan Amrin schus le'ev l'chayv l'isher. Chum hold it's a schus for an eved and a chayv for a woman. Chia bar boy Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar boy said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Very interesting question that we didn't ask in the Bavli. Boy, the question is like this: Haga atzmcha shayavdu shel ktzin hari chayv. How could you say that in every case, uniformly, it's a schus for an eved and a chayv for a woman? What if, think about it, what if he was a servant of an officer, of a very important person? So it's a chayv for him to leave, because he has the life in the Ritz, he's in the Ritz. Interesting. I mean, Paul Mamish L'chayri, you can answer that we're talking about Roy, Jordy. Interesting. It's a question of Rabbi Yochanan. Another question of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, boy, what if she was a wife of a person full of boils? She can't stand it. How can you say that just because he has to feed her that it's a chayv for her to leave? Doesn't make sense. She's dying to leave.
I think that's a fantastic argument.
Right. Yeah. So you're going to have to say the reason is not like that, not because of that, but the reason is something else. If you sell your servant without asking him, is he not sold? Of course he's sold. But if you try to divorce your wife without her knowing, she has to know about it. So that's the difference. But your servant, you don't even have to ask. You can sell him without asking. So therefore, you don't need his das. You can do it. So that's the real reason why the Eved, the Shlich, is Zoicha for the Eved even without him being. You can't go back. But Shenkin for a woman, you can't because she would need to know about it. Rabbi Oven says.
No, but I'm sorry. What do the words mean? Mipnei shehi kinyana, because she is his kinyan. So that it seems to. Seems to imply she doesn't have to know. She's
no, we're talking about the servant. You're right. It's interesting. It's in Lashon Nekeh, but we're talking about the servant. The servant is the kinyan of the master.
The
servant is the kinyan of the master. Robin explains, Kinyani will place him in a truma. He's his kinyan. So he's easily able to be placed in the truma. If we wanted to sell him to Yisrael, You can take 4 zuzid from the Yisrael and passel him. So therefore, because of that, you're able by your servant, it goes much faster than by the wife. You're not able to go back on your word by your servant, but you are able to go back on your word by your wife. Homer Tovi Avdi, they use the example of Tovi. He was a very famous servant, the servant of Rabbi Gamliel. Homer Tovi Avdi Asisi ben Chayden. Someone who says, Tovi, my servant, I made him free. I'm making him free. And we're talking about a nishtar. Areza ben Chayden, or if you said Areza ben Chayden, Zocha, it works. It has to be with a shtar. Yatsa ben Chayden, but if you use the lashon of Asi, I want to make him a ben Chayden. Rabbi Eber Zocha, Chum Eber Zocha. Rabbi says he's Zocha, Chum says he's not Zocha. So Machlokes. Nu shtar shicher zel le'avdi v'meitz. Let's say he said to give this shtar to my servant and he died. That was the end of our Mishnah. Rabbi Eber Zocha, Chum Eber Zocha. Chum says Zocha. Rabbi says Le Zocha, Chum says Zocha. So at the end of our mission, we just said, here we have a brisa where there's a machlokes. According to Rebbe, according to the Chum Zoch. Mishna points out this stuff that actually has it the opposite. Chum said Lo Zocha, which would fit with our mission. Rebbe says Lo Zocha. Kaifin is the Yerushalmi l'kaim divrei hames. Even though l'chayda, what do you mean he died? What do you mean he died? So how could you say Zocha? Kaifin is the Yerushalmi l'kaim divrei hames. We force the Yerushalmi. That's what the carbonate taich is. We're going to force the Yerushalmi to be Mekayim because he was a shtiv maratz. Even if legally you're not koina, we still force the Yerushalmi to do it.
But they're losing out by that.
Yeah, but you have to honor the word the shtiv maratz because we have a special takana. Then he might lose his mind if he doesn't think you're honoring him. So the Gemara explains, they're arguing about if he didn't explain, he didn't clarify. The Shimon didn't say anything. What are we dealing with? If he clearly said free him, we also agree that you have to honor his words. He said to write it and give it. So it means he wanted to be given as a document. Would be that you don't have to. If he died before it was given to him. So they probably try to schlep it out as long as possible. We're talking about he just said tnu without kiss. Rabbi Emer Tnu Kamer Kisvus. Rabbi says it's Kisvus Nu, so Loi Zocha. Rabbanan Amrin, Omer Tnu Kamer Shach. When you say Tnu, it's as if you're saying free him. Maybe we'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very.
Well, we only have one number left to finish the parak. So, just David, make sure to save your spot. It's going to be hard to find because it's the middle of the sugya.
Thank you, Javad.